What if the Confederacy had won the Civil War? Imagine a world where the bloodiest conflict in American history ended with a victory for the Southern states. The consequences would have been immense, reshaping not only the future of the United States but the entire world. In this story, we travel through this alternate timeline, exploring how America might have evolved, fractured, conflicted, and forever changed. In the scorching summer of 1863, the fate of the nation hung in the balance at Gettysburg. Historically, General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army was stopped and forced to retreat. But what if Lee had succeeded? What if the Confederate forces, fueled by desperation and a tactical gamble that paid off, had broken through the Union lines, crushing the Northern Army and sending shockwaves through the Union's leadership? This Confederate victory didn't just shake Northern morale, it shattered it like fragile glass. News of Gettysburg swept the North like a wildfire, consuming all hope. In New York, where confidence had reigned just yesterday, streets emptied, and newspapers ran with black headlines prophesying the Union's demise. "Union broken, Lee triumphs," screamed the New York Tribune on July 5, its usual fiery editorials replaced by somber reports of rout and despair. Even the most steadfast leaders felt the brittle glass of their convictions splintering into 1,000 fragments. A wave of panic, tinged with a desperate desire for peace, swept across the North, and with it, international opinion shifted dramatically. Great Britain, long hesitant to intervene, quietly began extending feelers for formal recognition of the Confederate States, seeing the Union's collapse as inevitable. British textile mills, starved for cotton, eyed the South with renewed interest, momentarily setting aside moral objections for economic gain. President Abraham Lincoln, a man already burdened by the immense pressures of war, faced a rapidly unraveling Union. His cabinet was bitterly divided. Secretary of State William Seward advocated for immediate peace talks, arguing that further bloodshed would only deepen the wound and lead to complete annihilation, while others, like the unyielding Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, vowed to fight to the last man, even if it meant a guerrilla campaign. Some northern states, exhausted by the mounting casualties and economic strain, openly considered peace negotiations. Powerful Copperhead factions, long vocal, now found immense popular support, organizing massive anti-war rallies in cities like Philadelphia and Cincinnati. Others, particularly in New England and the Western Territories, clung desperately to hope for reunification, their defiant rhetoric growing sharper with each loss. Instead of healing, the country plunged into a maelstrom of chaos, torn apart at its seams. Desertions from the Union Army soared in the months following Gettysburg, as soldiers, demoralized and weary, simply walked away from a cause that seemed lost, their loyalty to a crumbling nation shattered. In the turbulent months following the Confederate triumph at Gettysburg, the South moved swiftly to solidify its control. The Confederacy formally declared its independence, with European powers like Britain and France soon following suit with official recognition. Treaties were hastily drawn, sometimes under threat of renewed hostilities. New borders were drawn along the Mason-Dixon line and extended westward along various river systems and negotiated treaties, effectively splitting the continent into a vibrant, if volatile, Union and a rigid, expanding Confederacy. The United States shrank to a collection of northern and western states, its capital hastily relocated from Washington, D.C., deemed too vulnerable and symbolic of the lost dream of unity, to Chicago. This bustling Midwestern hub, with its strategic location, burgeoning industrial might, and central access to vital resources, became the new, grimly determined heart of the fractured Union, a symbol of resilience and adaptation, rather than grand historical legacy. Slavery, the bloody root of the conflict, took deep root in the South like a deadly weed, nourished by Confederate victory. The Confederacy, no longer under threat of abolition, enshrined it as the cornerstone of its society and economy. Plantations, particularly cotton, tobacco, and sugar, expanded aggressively into new territories, especially those in the Southwest and lands forcefully seized from Native American tribes. The concept of manifest destiny was twisted by the Confederacy into a divine right to expand slavery and their peculiar institution westward, leading to brutal campaigns against indigenous peoples who were either enslaved, massacred, or driven into ever-shrinking reservations. Any attempts by enslaved people to abolish this barbarity met brutal resistance. Slave patrols became even more pervasive, evolving into state-sponsored militias with unchecked power. Freedom fighters, both black and white abolitionists, either perished in daring but often futile revolts or were forced into exile, forming small, desperate communities in the Union or abroad, tirelessly plotting a future that seemed impossibly distant. Ironically, while rejecting Northern industrial models, some Confederate industrial magnates, eager to maximize profits without fully abandoning the concept of forced human exploitation, began investing heavily in agricultural automation. These primitive, steam-powered machines, designed more for efficiency than liberation, performed the most backbreaking tasks like plowing, planting, and even rudimentary harvesting. This wasn't a move towards freedom for the enslaved, but a chilling innovation designed to make human exploitation even more efficient and reduce the number of white overseers required, allowing for even larger, more profitable plantations. This nascent industrialization in the South, however, remained heavily focused on agriculture and resource extraction, mining, timber, a stark contrast to the North's diverse manufacturing base and its burgeoning tech sector. Southern cities like Richmond and Charleston grew, but their wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, and their infrastructure reflected a society built on stark class and racial divides. Meanwhile, the North, devastated but unbroken, found a grim determination born from profound loss. With its new capital in Chicago, the Union government focused intensely on industrial growth, technological innovation, and political reform. The trauma of defeat led to a stronger, more centralized federal government, paradoxically making it more efficient in its development and resource allocation. The Union rapidly reorganized its military, building a formidable defense force along its new, hostile border with the Confederacy, pouring immense resources into new weaponry and defensive fortifications. It also strengthened alliances with other democratic nations, particularly a wary but opportunistic Prussia, later unified Germany, and the burgeoning industrial powers of Scandinavia. Over time, the North embraced mass immigration from Europe and Asia, seeing it as both a vital source of labor for its booming factories and a reinforcement of its democratic ideals, a counterpoint to the South's closed society. Innovation flourished in its universities and factories, driving advancements in steel, railroads, and nascent electrical technologies, laying the groundwork for a technological revolution that would outpace the world. But the wounds of division ran painfully deep, leaving an enduring scar on the national psyche. The dream of a united America, once so vibrant, now felt like a distant, almost forgotten legend, replaced by a grim commitment to survival and the defense of its principles. Tensions between the two nations simmered for decades, a continuous low-grade fever across the continent. The borders between the two Americas became the continent's raw nerve, a heavily militarized zone stretching for thousands of miles. Watchtowers, barbed wire, and later, electronic sensors, became ubiquitous features of the landscape. In the 1880s, a minor skirmish over a border farm, perhaps involving disputed livestock or a suspected escaped slave, could easily escalate into a full-blown artillery exchange, sending civilians scrambling for cover and prompting panicked international diplomatic calls. Diplomatic notes, often laced with thinly veiled threats and accusations, flew between Richmond and Chicago faster than rumors of the cotton harvest, each side accusing the other of provocation and espionage. Children on both sides of the divide grew up knowing only the constant threat hanging in the air, their playtime often involving mock border patrols or grim games of Union versus Rebels, their understanding of history shaped by profoundly different narratives. The possibility of renewed war loomed over the continent like a dark, suffocating cloud, portending an inevitable storm. For decades, a shadow hung over the continent, casting a pall over every decision, every investment. Every border incident, every fiery speech from the Confederate Congress in Richmond or the Union Parliament in Chicago, became drops of poison, slowly but steadily filling the cup of endurance. Veterans from both sides, wizened and scarred, told their children and grandchildren about the hell of war, recounting harrowing tales of Gettysburg, Antietam, or Vicksburg, their voices etched with trauma. Yet, the younger generation, though hearing these stories, often saw only the inevitability of a new, perhaps even more devastating, storm, a settling of scores that felt long overdue. Espionage and sabotage were rampant, with Union agents attempting to incite unrest and aid escapees in the South, while Confederate operatives sought to destabilize Northern industries and fund political agitators. The Confederacy, driven by its economic model and an inherent need for more land to sustain its plantation system, sought to expand westward aggressively, pushing into lands held by Native American tribes and challenging Union claims. This led to multiple Indian Wars in the Confederate West that dwarfed the historical conflicts, marked by even greater brutality and displacement as Southern settlers sought new lands for plantations. This expansion also led to unexpected and often cynical alliances. The Confederacy, eager for international recognition and trade partners, forged closer ties with other authoritarian regimes in Europe, particularly the Austro-Hungarian Empire and later, a unified, militaristic Germany. They saw in these empires a shared vision of a hierarchical society, an emphasis on order over individual liberty, and a disdain for democratic ideals. These alliances provided the Confederacy with crucial arms, capital, and diplomatic support, insulating it from the full force of international condemnation. By the early 20th century, the world witnessed two Americas standing on opposite sides of a growing global conflict, their internal ideologies spilling over into international relations. The Confederacy tightly allied itself with authoritarian regimes in Europe, determined to preserve its harsh social order and economic interests. Their expansionist ambitions even led to a brief, but intense, Caribbean crisis with the British Empire in 1902. The Confederacy, seeking to control vital trade routes and establish naval bases in the Gulf of Mexico and beyond, attempted to exert influence over newly independent island nations like Cuba and Haiti, challenging established colonial powers and leading to several naval standoffs in the Caribbean. This forced the Confederacy to diversify its alliances beyond Europe, sometimes even covertly supporting anti-colonial movements in other parts of the world to destabilize British and French influence. This created unexpected and cynical partnerships, with Confederate gold funding nationalist rebels in Africa or Asia, solely to weaken their rivals and open new markets for Southern goods, regardless of the political consequences for local populations. The Union, in contrast, became a symbol of democracy and human rights, attracting liberal intellectuals, political dissidents, and ambitious immigrants from around the globe. It rallied other nations under its banner, forming a loose but increasingly formalized alliance of democratic and industrially advanced states that included a democratic France, a wary Great Britain, who, despite initial recognition of the Confederacy, grew increasingly uneasy with its expansionist tendencies, human rights abuses, and competition in global markets, and various Scandinavian countries. This ideological division profoundly transformed global politics. The First World War, when it erupted in 1914, took on a distinctly ideological character beyond the historical rivalries. The Confederacy, viewing itself as a natural partner to the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, fought alongside them, fueled by a desire to break the Union's alliances, expand its own international influence, and solidify its status as a global power. The Union, naturally, joined the Allies, seeing the war as a fight for the future of democracy against authoritarianism, a direct continuation of their own domestic struggle. The ripple effects altered everything, from the Russian Revolution, which might have faced a different international landscape for its survival, perhaps with less Western intervention if the Union was preoccupied, to the eventual rise of fascism in a war-torn Europe, potentially with even more dangerous international backing from the Confederacy, who saw in fascist ideology a kindred spirit of hierarchical control and racial purity. In the decades that followed, the United States as a single entity ceased to exist. Two nations grew apart, each with its own culture, politics, and challenges, their identities forged in the crucible of their separation and continuous rivalry. The Confederacy, despite its victory, was not immune to internal strife. It was shaken by internal unrest as more voices, even within its white population, began to question the brutal system of forced labor and the rigid social stratification that defined their society. While outright slavery remained enshrined in law until the mid-20th century, relentless international pressure, combined with internal unrest, led to a gradual, cosmetic shift towards indentured servitude or contract labor for black citizens. This was a thinly veiled continuation of forced labor, often enforced through perpetual debt, vagrancy laws, or punitive apprenticeship systems, reminiscent of an even harsher Jim Crow era but lacking any pretense of equality. A powerful To Freedom Road movement, largely organized by exiled Southern abolitionists and supported covertly by Union intelligence agencies, emerged as an underground network aiding escapes and promoting resistance. Though it faced brutal suppression by the omnipresent Confederate secret police, this movement constantly challenged the regime, orchestrating strikes, acts of sabotage against plantations and railways, and disseminating forbidden literature through clandestine routes. Its heroes, like the legendary Shadow Conductor Harriet Tubman, operating from Union safe houses, became figures of myth and defiance. In a tragic and ultimately futile attempt at reconciliation in the 1970s, some well-meaning Northern academic groups and humanitarian organizations proposed limited economic ties with the Confederacy in exchange for human rights reforms. These efforts, dubbed the Chicago Accords, spectacularly failed. Confederate leadership shrewdly used the opportunity to gain much-needed hard currency and technology, particularly in automation and surveillance, but delivered no meaningful reforms, only hardening the resolve of both sides and revealing the deep chasm that could not be bridged. For many in the Union, it was a painful lesson that appeasement only emboldened tyranny. The Union, meanwhile, grappled with its own set of problems. Rapid industrialization and the influx of diverse immigrant populations led to significant economic inequality and labor unrest, reminiscent of the historical Gilded Age but perhaps more extreme due to the constant military expenditures and nationalistic fervor. Immigration tensions rose as diverse populations struggled to integrate, leading to periods of social friction and nativist backlashes. Political corruption became a persistent challenge, with powerful industrial trusts wielding immense influence in Chicago. However, the Union remained fundamentally committed to democratic ideals, albeit with ongoing internal struggles to live up to them. Its political system, though often messy and contentious, allowed for dissent, protest, and gradual change through democratic means, distinguishing it sharply from its southern neighbor. But despite all their differences, one thing remained constant: the ghost of the Civil War continued to whisper in the souls of both nations, a reminder of what was lost and what must be defended. The national identity of the Union became inextricably linked to its opposition to the Confederacy, making it a negative identity, in some ways, defined by what it was not. By 2025, the North and South were divided not only geographically but by a deep ideological chasm that permeated every aspect of life, from education to entertainment. Confederate society remained marked by rigid social stratification and ongoing racial conflict. While in Union megacities like Chicago, New York, and a thriving San Francisco, endless neon lights shimmered and high-speed maglev trains roared through integrated urban landscapes, symbolizing progress and interconnectedness. In many Confederate cities like Richmond, Charleston, and a perpetually struggling New Orleans, the shadow of manual labor still reigned. The smell of open sewers, despite modern technology, still hung in parts of impoverished black neighborhoods, a stark symbol of systemic neglect. Segregation, rebranded as separate development or racial harmony through order, was enforced with brutal efficiency, maintained by a pervasive and feared network of internal security forces. Public infrastructure, education, and healthcare for its black population lagged centuries behind, reflecting a deliberate policy of suppression designed to keep them in a state of perpetual subservience. Technology and general infrastructure lagged significantly behind the Unions, except for specific military, surveillance, and agricultural sectors where innovation was directly tied to control and profit. Many southern cities, particularly those not central to the regime's power, suffered from widespread poverty and instability, with a desperate underclass perpetually on the brink of revolt. The Confederate government maintained its grip through an omnipresent secret police, the Homeland Guard, strict censorship enforced by state media, and a pervasive cult of personality around its founding fathers and their noble cause, continuously reinterpreting history to justify their power. The Union, meanwhile, was a global leader in technology, education, and cultural influence. Its universities attracted the brightest minds worldwide, fostering cutting-edge research in AI, sustainable energy, and space exploration. Its entertainment industry, born from a diverse and free society, dominated global markets, producing media that often subtly or overtly critiqued authoritarianism and celebrated freedom. Yet it faced its own struggles, fierce political polarization, often along lines of economic class, regional interests, or competing visions of its own future. Persistent economic disparity between the wealthy elites of the tech and finance industries and the working class, along with the challenge of maintaining unity among its increasingly diverse population, led to ongoing social movements and debates. However, the Union's political system, though often messy and contentious, allowed for dissent, protest, and gradual change through democratic means, distinguishing it sharply from its southern neighbor. The border between the two nations remained heavily militarized, a constant, physical scar on the continent. Massive concrete walls, electronic fences, motion sensors, and drone patrols stretched across thousands of miles, punctuated by heavily fortified checkpoints known ominously as gates of no return. Frequent protests by human rights activists and desperate escapees attempting to cross, often resulting in tragic clashes between Union Border Patrol, who aimed to assist, and Confederate containment forces, who shot to kill, were commonplace, making the international news daily. Those living near the border lived in fear and uncertainty, their lives shaped by the lingering bitterness of a century-old war, with generations growing up knowing nothing but this permanent division. Families remained divided by the border, with poignant stories of separated relatives unable to visit each other due to stringent travel restrictions from the Confederacy and the mortal danger inherent in attempting to cross. Internationally, the split Americas profoundly complicated global alliances and trade. The world superpowers had to navigate a complex landscape where two Americas competed fiercely for influence, often through proxy conflicts in resource-rich regions. The United Nations, a fragile organization, remained deeply divided on recognizing the Confederacy, with a powerful bloc of democratic nations, led by the Union, condemning its human rights abuses and advocating for sanctions, while a smaller but influential bloc, often authoritarian or resource-dependent nations seeking economic ties with the South's vast agricultural exports, tacitly supported its sovereignty, arguing for non-interference in internal affairs. Human rights organizations, based predominantly in the Union and Europe, continually condemned the ongoing oppression in the South, publishing damning reports and advocating for stronger international action, though often with limited success. The cultural legacy of the Civil War victory continued to haunt both nations, profoundly shaping their identities. In the South, textbooks told a meticulously crafted, sanitized story, celebrating Confederate heroes like Lee and Jackson as freedom fighters, downplaying the horrors of slavery as a benevolent institution or necessary evil, and glorifying the lost cause as a noble defense of states' rights and Southern honor. History was a tool of control, ensuring loyalty and preventing dissent. In the North, education emphasized unity, civil rights, and the tragic consequences of division, but still struggled with the legacy of a fractured past, often romanticizing that might have been if the Union had crushed the rebellion decisively. Museums and memorials across the Union served as stark reminders of the cost of division. Families remained divided. Descendants of those who fought on both sides carried the weight of history, some seeking reconciliation through cross-border dialogues, peace initiatives, and artistic expressions, others holding fast to old grudges, passed down through generations like a painful inheritance. The dream of a united America was a distant memory, replaced by caution, mistrust, and the grim reality of two vastly different societies coexisting, uneasily, on the same continent, each forever defined by the outcome of a single summer day in Gettysburg. This alternative history reminds us how fragile the ideals of freedom and equality can be. A single battle, a single decision, a different outcome at Gettysburg, can change the course of nations so profoundly that it creates entirely new realities. The real history of the United States, though painful and imperfect, marked by its own struggles with racial injustice and inequality, reflects hard-fought progress toward a more just society, progress that would have been unimaginable in this alternate reality. But imagining a world where the Confederacy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, identity, and justice. It serves as a stark reminder of the fundamental incompatibility of freedom and slavery, and the devastating, long-term consequences of institutionalized oppression. It challenges us to appreciate the freedoms we have, to actively participate in upholding them, and to never take unity or hard-won progress for granted. The shadows of a lost future, where the ideals of liberty for all remained elusive, serve as a powerful cautionary tale. In the end, history is not just about what happened, but what might have been. And in that possibility lies the power to learn, to grow, and to strive for a better future, constantly mindful of the paths not taken and the prices paid.